Well, good morning, everybody. I'm glad to see that there's so many people here for this presentation on figuring out how to get yourself into the Drupal job market here, because I know that we all like to have the opportunity to make a nice living doing something that we enjoy doing. So welcome. The good news is that there's a ton of demand for Drupal developers right now. It's even projected to not only continue, but to increase. And so there's lots of opportunity out there for you to be able to get great work doing building Drupal websites. The problem is, I'm sure for some of you who are here right now, is that even though you hear people say about the fact that there's all of this demand for Drupal developers, when you're not plugged into that stream of jobs, it can seem like impossible to be able to get a hold of those jobs. I know that I was on that side of things for a good amount of time when I first started out, and it was really hard for me to hear that there's all of this work out there for Drupal developers, and yet I wasn't able to get any of that work for myself. So it was a bit perplexing for me to wonder about, well, then why don't these people just send some of the work to me? How can I get to take advantage of all that work that's out there? So one of the keys is that you need to get plugged into the community, and you need to get plugged into the channels where the work is coming from. And then it really is the case that once you're established, that you can get your share of the work. I've got recruiters contacting me all the time right now with job opportunities, and I'm having to turn them away because I'm booked right now. I've got as much work as I can take on, and I can't do any more. I can't take on any more hours right now. So let me tell you what it was like for me in the beginning, and some of the things that made a difference, and some of the things that you can do so that you can get plugged into this Drupal job market. So when I started out, I know that part of the problem that I was having was the way that I was presenting myself when I would talk to people, that I didn't have a positive enough energy and an excited enough energy, that I probably came across more of as being a charity case than somebody who is going to be a valuable resource for them. So that's one thing to make sure that you're not sabotaging yourself by approaching people, basically like begging them to see if they would give you an opportunity to start doing Drupal. So while I was working through that process of figuring out how to present myself to people, in the meantime, I had been studying Drupal as much as I could. I was spending about, I'm going to say 12 hours a day, every day of the week for about 6 months. It's not exactly that amount. I wasn't really keeping a timesheet and recording things accurately, but I would get up in the morning and I would come sit down in my den and on my couch, and I'd turn on my computer and I would just start reading stuff and finding out whatever I could find out, and then I was trying to put it into practice with whatever type of sites that I could. At the time when I started first using Drupal, I had a couple of other ideas for businesses that I want to do, and I wasn't really planning to be a Drupal developer. I needed to have a website for the businesses that I wanted, and I had already gone through a couple of different iterations of making those websites, and I reached the point that I knew that I needed to do something more with them. And so I was moving from a different website builder tool to something that I was going to be able to have more control over on my own. And I tried a number of different website builders. I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. I couldn't have even told you what CMS stood for, much less to be able to tell you what Drupal was and what the various, let's say, competitors to Drupal were. So I was just clicking through the fantastical one-click installer on the shared hosting that I had at that time and seeing what I could do with the various tools that they had. And eventually, after having tried a bunch of other site building tools, I guess, I scrolled down far enough in the list and I came across this Drupal. And I'm pretty sure I'd heard somebody say the word Drupal before, but I didn't really know what Drupal was. But anyway, I just decided to let Fantastico install it. And so it did its thing, and this was Drupal 6 that I was using. So after the fresh install of Drupal, I got to a page that says, you have no front page content yet. And then there were, I forget if it was like 4 or 5 different steps that it shows that you can take there to start building your Drupal site. And so I just started following through those steps. And I thought it was pretty cool that there was this page here that told me what I was supposed to do next. So it's kind of funny for me when I hear people say that Drupal is so hard to learn, because I used other tools and I did not have an easy time with them. I did use another content management system that I just couldn't get my head around, and it's one that people will name as one that's easier to do than Drupal. But it wasn't easier for me. Where I really got stuck using it is when it came time to add the blog to my website, and I just couldn't figure out how to get the blog there. And I searched for it, and I just couldn't find any information. And after spinning my wheels, I think for, I don't know if it was a day or a day and a half, something like that, I finally gave up and said, well, I'm not going to use this tool. I can't take this much time to figure out how I can get this blog to work. It was a struggle enough for me to even get the static pages up on the site and to get the menu set up, but then when I just couldn't seem to get the blog to work, I said, well, forget it. I'm getting rid of this tool. I'm going to try something else. And I think that Drupal was the next tool that I tried after that, because prior to using this other content management system, I think I'd been using more of like static site builder tools. So I removed the other content management system, I installed Drupal, I get this page that tells me the steps that I can take next, and one of the things it says on that page is that you can extend the functionality of your site using modules. And there was a link right there that took me to the modules page. So I clicked it and I get to the modules, and lo and behold, I see there's this module that's called blog. And so I clicked it, and right away I had a blog going on my site, and I was so thrilled. And getting the menus to go was no problem, because I found this thing that was called navigation menu. And so I said, okay, great, that's exactly what I need. I need to let people navigate through my site. So I had a bunch of these static pages, and I put all of my static pages in the navigation menu. I had the blog that was up and running, and I was really excited. I was good to go. I was using Drupal, and I had spent maybe about, I think it was like 45 minutes to recreate the site that I had in this other platform that was in a proprietary site building tool that was on some other, it was free hosting that you could upgrade to be, you could use your own domain name on it, and so it was like $99 a year, I think, and they had their own tool that they used. But that tool wasn't working for me anymore, so I needed to move beyond that. So here it was. I had spent time looking at these other tools. I had upgraded myself to shared hosting. I thought that was a big step up from where I was before, that I actually had some more control over the server. And I finally got around to installing Drupal, and then it was like 45 minutes later, and I had my website recreated, and I was just ecstatic. I thought, wow, this is such a great tool. This was so easy for me to use. Now, of course, I was just a beginner, and even though I felt like I knew how to do Drupal, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was able to get a site that was functional for me. Of course, it was using the Garland theme. I didn't have any idea about contributed themes that I could use to make my site look different. Hey, I thought that Garland looked pretty cool. I liked the blue colors. I liked the way that things laid out on the page. I thought that was pretty neat stuff. And I was pretty proud of myself, pretty happy with all the stuff in the menu there. Never mind the fact that I was using the menu that's called navigation menu, which is more of an administrative menu. I didn't have any idea about using menus properly. I just needed to have something on the page. I didn't really have any idea about contributed modules either. I was just thrilled that I had this site up and running, and I had it running that way for a while, actually. And I was getting registrations on the site, and I was so new to this in the beginning and so clueless about how things worked with the internet that I was thrilled when I was getting all these registrations on my site. And I thought, wow, this is great. I can't believe how fast people found me and how interested they are in my website already. And I had no clue that those were just bots and spam registration that I was getting. And I really couldn't imagine why, when I looked at some of these email addresses, it's like, gee, how come there are people in Europe or Russia or China who are interested in my site already? That's pretty amazing. And so eventually I did realize that, wait, these are not really people who are signing up for my site. They're not really interested in it. This is spam registrations. And so I needed to find a way to cut down on that. And that's where I looked for my first contributed module to help me out with that. And I don't remember if I used CAPTCHA straight up or if I used CAPTCHA with the reCAPTCHA functionality of it. But I made my way through getting that module installed on the site. And I do believe that I had done enough reading at that point already that I knew that you didn't put modules into the modules folder, that you had to navigate your way under the site's all modules, and that's where you placed it. So I think that's one thing that I did right in the beginning, is that I did install the contributed module to the right place. And I continued using my site, and then of course eventually I get some notification that says something about there's an update available for core. And so I needed to update the site. And when I looked at Fantastico didn't have that next version. And I don't remember if it was a security release or not. If I recall correctly, I think it probably was a security release, because I think I did get some message that told me about, oh, we recommend updating immediately. And I thought, oh no, there's a security vulnerability with my site. And so I better update right away. And so I had to figure out how to do that. And I made my way in through the file manager, and it took me so many hours to update Drupal that first time. I really didn't have any clue of what would change and what I needed to worry about changing, and so it was this painstaking process. I can't even believe that what I was really doing was like looking through all of the core modules and comparing them to see if I had modified those modules, but it was something crazy like that, where I was looking at these various things, all these different modules, and trying to figure out, like, is my site going to break if I replace this module with that module? I had no idea about, the reason that you put stuff in sites all modules is so that when you do your update, you just leave sites alone, and then you update everything else for core. So it was a really, really challenging and scary process for me when I updated Drupal that first time, and really time-consuming process. And believe me, at that point, I wasn't doing anything in a terminal, SSHing into a site. I hadn't heard of this Drush tool that you could use. This was all manual things that I was doing. And in the course of doing the update, I forget, there's something that I had done wrong. I don't remember what it was exactly, but something broke with my site, and I said, oh no, I should have just waited for Fantastico to do this. And I don't even remember what I broke at this point, but somehow I figured out where I had gotten the wires crossed, and I got it straightened out. It's not that I was getting a white screen on my site, it was some other type of error that I got. But I sorted it out, and I was able to pull the pieces together, and then my site was working as I expected it to work again. and and I was feeling good. And I don't know when I finally started understanding about when people are visiting the site and they go to a page and they end up going to something like node/2, that wasn't really going to be that useful for them, and that what you really wanted was something that was more helpful, like about us, or some user-friendly type of description of what that page was. And I had looked through some of the different core modules prior to that, and I did see this module that was called the Path module, and the way that I read the description of it, it said something like, it allows people to give their pages whatever path name they want to have. And when I read that first, I thought, well, why would I want to allow people to name the pages whatever they want? I'm the one that built these pages. I don't want them to be able to name my pages whatever they want. That's going to mess up my site if I want to name it something and then somebody else named it something else. And so I totally misinterpreted what the description of that module meant. I thought it meant that any of the users on the site were going to be able to do that. But eventually I got over that bit of confusion about, well, no, I'm the one who gets to specify the path name, and then when people go to the page, they'll see something more helpful than node/2. So I named the pages on my site, and I didn't really understand what the restrictions were for naming, and I think that somehow I got it into my head that I had to give the alias, it had to have underscores in the name. And so I was making sure I went through all my pages, and I don't remember what I did in terms of whether it was lowercase or uppercase, what I thought about that. But I got my pages named with their new paths. And, so I just continued on with the site, and I think that that's pretty much the way that I had the site running for about a year or so. And I had showed the site to people and had gotten some feedback on it, and people had said things about, well, your site looks kind of generic. It looks a little bit plain. And so I thought, okay, well, let me see what I can do to make the site look better. So that's where I started looking into finding a theme for the site. I had progressed enough that I understood about the notion of themes and that there were contributed themes out there. And so I started installing themes on my site. And I went crazy with there was a theme that I had that you can configure in a lot of different ways. And so I did all these different configurations, and I thought it would be really cool for the users on the site. Not that I really had any users on the site. It was basically still just spam registrations. But for when I did have users on the site, that it would be really cool for them to be able to choose their own theme. So I set up all of these variations of the theme, and I set the user profile so that they can choose their own theme, thinking this would be a really great idea. This would be a great way for people to be able to customize the site for themselves. Not really thinking about the fact that I'm really the one who's supposed to be in charge of the branding of the site, not my users. And another crazy idea that I had while I was building the site, like I would do blog posts about the fact that, I've just updated my site from Drupal 6 point whatever to Drupal 6 point then whatever the next thing is. Let me know if you're finding any problems when you're using the site here. And I didn't really think about the fact that maybe I shouldn't be broadcasting to people what version of Drupal I'm using. Although honestly, still to this day, I don't engage in security by obscurity. I don't make the changelog.txt unreadable by people. I don't delete it. I just make sure that I keep my sites up to date. And when there's a security update, I make sure that I apply the security update quickly. So I don't know that it was something terrible that I had mentioned in the blog post that I had updated Drupal. But I did start updating it more regularly because I did eventually learn the process of getting the tarball and unzipping the tarball and delete all of these files, delete all of the folders, move the stuff over from the tarball into place. And so I felt pretty good about that. That now it didn't take me hours to update my site anymore. I was able to do it. I don't remember. It still took me maybe, I don't know if it was 10 minutes or 15 minutes. It was under an hour. I would say it was probably in that range, and I felt pretty sharp. I felt pretty good about myself that I was getting so much more advanced. I still didn't understand anything about this Drush tool. And that's not that I didn't understand. I didn't even know about the Drush tool. And I still wasn't using any type of SSH. I was developing on Windows at that time, so as far as what I would need to do is I would have needed to use PuTTY to get to a terminal interface with the server, but at that time I still wasn't doing that, because this was just my own personal site that I had, that I was using for another business idea that I had. And this is how things went on for a period of time. This is how I was beginning to learn some things about Drupal. And after a period of time, the different ideas that I had tried weren't taking me where I wanted to get to, and I decided that I needed to look for a new path to take. And so, having been a programmer previously, I thought, well, I'm going to come back to my programming roots, and I'm going to teach myself how to do web development, because the internet is a big thing right now. I don't see that the internet's going away. Everybody needs a website, and so I should teach myself to be a web developer. And I do have to admit that when I started playing around with my ideas for these other ventures of my own, that I had gotten encouragement from my family as well as my wife, saying, well, you should, this is what you should do. Why are you pursuing this other idea? You should build websites. And I brushed it off, and I said, well, no, this is what I want to do right now, and I don't really know how to build websites right now, and I don't want to take the time to learn. And it didn't matter when people were telling me about it. I pushed it off for such a long time until I finally reached the point that I didn't really have anything else that was going for me anyway. And I said, well, okay, I don't have any other paying work right now. I've got time on my hands, so I might as well start learning how to do web development. And if other work comes in for me to do, then I'll do that, and then I'll come back and I'll just practice doing the web development work in my free time. Well, I had a lot of free time, and that's where I said, well, let me sit down and get serious about this and just learn how to do this. So based on the first interaction that I had with Drupal, based on doing my own personal project, I started to dig into it further, and I said, okay, well, I want to be able to do more than just use some core functionality, and I want to be able to do more than just install contributed themes, and I want to be able to actually write some modules. I had found out in the course of my reading that I'd be doing about writing modules, and it wasn't that hard to write a module, and all you really needed was a .info file. I think at the time they were saying all you needed was a .info file, and it would appear on your modules page. But it just takes a couple of files that you need so that you can get your first module exposed. And so I started to practice doing some of those things. And I looked around at some of the things that I could do. I came up with some example projects for myself, and I started building out some more sites. Build out a blog for myself, which to this day is still the same blog that I have. So I practiced building a theme on that blog, and then with that blog, with writing the blog post, I wanted to be able to categorize the blog posts. And there was this other core module that you can use that was called taxonomy. And I know that the first time I saw taxonomy, first of all, it sounds like a really big word to me, taxonomy. This sounds scientific. this, seems like, wow, you have to be a really smart person to know about taxonomy. And so when I looked at the description of the taxonomy module, again, I misinterpreted what it was saying. It says something along the lines that it enables you to categorize things on your site. And this, again, was something that made me very nervous, because I thought, well, what happens if I categorize things on my site incorrectly? My site might break. I don't know when I'll be smart enough and good enough at Drupal to be able to use the taxonomy module. So it's something that I had stayed away from for a long time, because it seemed like it was going to be a really challenging thing to learn how to use. And so when I finally came around to making my personal blog, and I realized, oh yeah, categorizing things on the site, like I'm going to categorize my blog post, I'm going to tag them with certain things. And so I started playing around with the taxonomy module. So, this gives you an idea of where I came from in the beginning and how many mistakes I had and how confusing it was for me, all the misconceptions that I held on to, and the things that I just did flat out wrong. But that's okay. It was all part of the process of learning to do Drupal. And so when I was interested in getting more into developing things, once again, I dug into the documentation, and I just wanted to start reading everything that I could, because I said, if I'm going to be a web developer, I need to make sure that I understand first principles. I need to know how everything works. And so I would start reading stuff on Drupal.org, or I would start reading some post that I found on the internet, and there would be a link in there. They'd reference something else, and I'd say, oh, well, for me to understand this page that I'm reading right now, I probably should make sure that I read that other page. So I'd open that page in another tab, and I'd start reading that page, and of course that page would have links on it. And so I'd say, oh, well, I need to make sure that I understand these things that are referenced on this page, so I would open in another tab. And you can imagine where that would lead me, is that I was opening tab after tab after tab. I'd make it into a certain part of the page until I would open up a tab, and I was never getting anywhere, because I just kept opening up new tabs, and every page links to other pages. You'll hardly find any page that doesn't have links to anything. So I really was spinning my wheels for a long time. Well, one of the things that I also did as I started my quest to become a web developer is I searched around on Meetup to find out whether there were any people who got together to talk about Drupal. And well, lo and behold, sure, there are people that get together to talk about Drupal. There are a lot of Drupal meetups, all over the world. There are a lot of Drupal meetups in Colorado. And so I had started attending the Drupal meetups, and I would have a list of questions, and I would go there and I would ask my questions about things to get a better idea of how to approach things. And I know that one of the early questions that I had asked, I forget exactly what I was wanting to do on a site. I think maybe it was something like making a testimonial block, I think is what it was. I think there was a contributed module that, I forget if it was testimonial block, but it was some type of a block. And so that was, I think, the first module that I had looked at the code for and got some idea, a tiny bit of an idea of what the module developer was doing, and was still, pretty intimidated about the idea of how long it's going to take for me to be able to write a module. But, I came up with some idea of, I think what I wanted to do is say, well, shoot, instead of just having this testimonial block, let me come up with this module that's going to allow people to utilize a block. I don't remember what I thought, to do whatever. And I thought I was really onto something, this is where I was going to make my big name in the Drupal world, that I was going to write my first module that was going to be so useful to everybody who's using the sites, and they were just going to be amazed by how clever I was, that I came up with this configurable thing that you could do so many different things within the block. And so I went to a meetup, and I explained the general idea that I had for this new module that I wanted to write. And a couple of people at the meetup looked at me and said, well, that kind of sounds like something that you'd be able to do with views. And I had to stop and say, what do you mean views? What's views? And so the person running the meetup said, okay, well, let me go into views and build a view for you. Let me show you an example of how you would build this thing that you're describing. So he opens up a Drupal site. I would imagine he had it just in his local development environment. And he opens up views, and then he puts together this block to do something. I don't remember exactly what he had it do, but it took him 5 minutes or so to click through the interface, and then he said, there you go, here's the block, this is what I'm talking about. And I was just stunned, sitting there, holy cow, how did you know how to do that? This is unbelievable. So I had my next thing that just completely floored me, wow, views, how can I learn to use views? You must have to be really smart to be able to use views. And so I had something else that it was time for me to start studying. And it also gave me this awakening of, wow, and here I thought I was so clever that I was going to build this module that specifically did blocks. And that's all that it did. And it allowed you to put some stuff in the block, whatever it was. But then I thought I was going to make a big name for myself in the Drupal community because I'm a newcomer and already I'm going to be contributing a module that people are going to say, wow, how come I didn't think of this before? This is so awesome. And then I see this contributed module called views, and I find out, no, there's something that's really clever and useful. This guy I know is really smart who wrote this. This is really powerful. And that's where I started getting more of an idea about how do you build a Drupal site? That there are tools that you can use to get things done on the site in a really configurable and extendable and powerful way. And I don't know how long after that I decided that I wanted to be able to do something with, I forget what I even thought of it as at the time, because I don't think I knew about the form API. I don't remember what I wanted to do, but I wanted to, I wanted to be able to do something better than when I had done one of my other attempts of making my first module. The way that I did my first module is that I went into the core functionality, I clicked the PHP filter, and I created a node, I enabled the PHP filter, and I put a bunch of PHP code in that node. And I was so proud of myself. Look, I've got stuff happening on my site. And so I realized that that's not really the way. Well, that's not a great way to build modules because you can't contribute that to the community for people to use. So I knew that I'd have some way that I was going to get that module that had, I think I did have a form element in there. And so this may have been how I stumbled into the form API. And again, I had gone to a Drupal meetup, and they had a question and answer part of that meetup. And I raised my hand, and I don't remember how I asked the question, but I don't know if I knew about the form API already, or I was describing to the group that I had written a module, but I had put the code into a node, and it had a form that you could fill out, and I wanted to turn it into a module the right way. And so I was told about the form API, and there was a person at the meetup who had done a screencast about using the form API. And he gave me the link to the screencast, and I went home. I'm sure I watched it that night. This was pretty typical that as I would go to meetups and I would ask my questions and people would tell me things, I'd come home all excited about the new things that I learned, and then I would be up for hours playing around, practicing the things that I was told about there. And so I'm sure I came home that night after the meetup and I watched this screencast on building a form using the form API. And that's where Drupal really started to click for me. At that point, I had dealt with contributed modules, I had dealt with contributed themes, I got a chance to see views, and I got some sense of how to put some pieces together to make a Drupal site. But I still didn't really have any idea of, well, but how do these people write these modules? And how do you make this stuff happen on the site when you write your modules? And so when I found out about the Form API and I saw the screencast and I got a chance to practice it and build my first, it's a hello world type of a form, it was like a light bulb went off for me, because that introduced me to, well, hook menu. And that introduced me to how Drupal getForm calls your form builder and how you use the structured array to build the form. And I know that there are people in the community with a lot of issues about Drupal's theme layer and how you do theme implementation. There are a lot of people who have issues with the Form API, and they'll they'll criticize it. They'll joke about it, saying this isn't a real API. This nested structured array is not an API. But for me, this was a pretty cool thing to finally get my head around, that Drupal makes things possible for you to do by following certain patterns. And if you follow those patterns, then Drupal can take care of the rest for you. And the Form API is one of those tools that gives you a structure and a pattern that you can follow to build things on the site. And that's where I really started to take off with my Drupal skill set, because then I had a better idea of how to understand how modules did things, and I had a better idea of how to interpret what the modules were doing when I looked at the code, and I got a better sense of this idea of hooks, that Drupal uses hooks, and that if you will name things a certain way, that hook will be invoked. And so, I wouldn't say at that point that I had really much of a sense of how modules were able to find out if other contributed modules were in existence on the site and then do things to plug into those modules. But I was starting to get a sense of how you could write your own module that didn't have to know specifically about other modules, and certainly didn't have to hack into other modules to get things done, but that you could expose things in your module that then other modules would be able to make use of. And I don't know the exact timeline, but eventually, after having spent, like I say, about 6 months knocking around, finally finding a way to get some traction and make some progress, I felt ready that, okay, now I know enough to build websites using Drupal. I know about defining your own menus. You don't just shove everything into the navigation menu. I know about don't put PHP inside of nodes. That's a really bad idea to do that. I know about using these hooks so that you can get things to happen. I understood something about a base theme and a sub-theme, although I still didn't know very much about CSS. That's another one of those things that the first time I heard it, I didn't know what CSS was. Even then, once I could say, well, cascading style sheet, that I thought, oh my gosh, it seemed like that would be like another programming language that I was going to have to learn. So I still had a lot that I needed to understand. I don't think that I knew about Firebug at that point. And I know when I started out, I certainly didn't know about image cache. I do believe that I knew about CCK and adding fields to your content types. I had some idea about utilizing different content types and how that could be a benefit when you wanted to do things with views to show things. I think that I did know about NodeQ. I had come across that somehow or another, and come across a video podcast on, in my searches. And so I thought that I had enough tools to get started with things, even though some of the things that I'm mentioning to you that I didn't know that I didn't know those tools either. But that's okay. So my wife was starting her own business at that time as well, and so she needed a website, and so that was the first paying project that I was going to work on, was my wife's website. And it was a great experience to do that because I built out the basic things on her site, including the contact form, and she wanted to have a little bit more information on the contact form than was there by default. She wanted to gather some more information. She wanted to have some more text on the contact form. And I don't know what I did a Google search on, but I searched on something, and somebody had done a post about using the form alter function. And additionally, they mentioned the hook mail alter function, because if you're adding stuff to your contact form that doesn't really exist there, you need to have some way that when the mail function is going to send it out, that it picks up these new fields that you added to that form. So I got my first exposure to the idea of these alter functions. And then I was able to take that next step of understanding, oh, now this is how you can have a module change something that a different module is doing without having to change that module. There are these alter functions. So it was the next level of hooks that I was learning about. So I built the site for my wife. Again, I didn't know anything about image cache. And so when I was building out her site, we wanted to place images in places. I was doing all this stuff with grabbing the images and pulling them into an image manipulation tool and cropping them, getting the images sized the way that I want. And then when you would change your mind about it, I get really aggravated and say, could you make up your mind already? Because every time you change your mind, I've got to go to the source image again, and I've got to crop it and scale it and do all that stuff again, and then I got to upload it again onto the server here, and it's just really tedious doing that. I didn't have any idea how to configure things in a way that it would be using image cache, how to configure things so that my wife would be able to place images in an image field that's on the node itself, so that when you go to the page that's displaying that node, that you could have views, find out the image that was attached to that node, and generate a block using an image preset for that image. And that you could have those blocks placed on the pages in the sidebar, and they would be dynamically generated based on the information that was on that node. No, instead the way I went about doing things is I created a slew of blocks on the site, and the blocks themselves directly used the image tag and referenced a specific image that was on the server, and I went through the block administrative interface and just set the blocks in the sidebar and used the functionality to say which page, what paths would this block be applied on? And, that's how I banged together her site. And to me, it seemed like my wife had so many particular needs, and that she was a really difficult client. And at the time, all I had built for her was a simple marketing brochure website. And the truth is, she didn't ask for anything all that unusual. She asked for things that were pretty simple. I just didn't know the right tools to use to build that functionality. And so it became this type of a convoluted mess. I think at that time I was using admin menu. I knew about that contributed module. And so that's the tool that I gave for my wife to be able to maintain her site on her own. Use admin menu. I knew something about roles and permissions, and so I had set up her permissions in a way that she would have access to different things without being overwhelmed with access to everything. But I put together the site in a pretty clunky way. Her site looked attractive. I took a couple of different themes and kind of mashed them together because I still didn't really know much about CSS and dealing with images and the likes. And so I grabbed some other things and mashed them together in a way. I didn't hack the modules. I cloned, I copied and put things in different places. But we got a functional website up for her that was an attractive website. She was happy with it when she showed it to her friends. I would say they were impressed with the website. They say, "Oh, this is a really nice looking website." So from the front, it looked pretty good. But from the back end, honestly, it was still really a mess. And that's some of the things that I think many people, when they have somebody build a Drupal site for them, end up encountering. Because there are a lot of people who maybe know something about PHP, but haven't gotten their heads around the Drupal framework and how you use Drupal to do the things that you need to do on the site. And they'll do things like enabling the PHP filter and putting PHP in the node. They'll do things like shoving things in inappropriate menus. They'll do things like putting together, architecting the site in a way that is so kludgy and confusing that then when they turn the site over to the people to maintain on their own, which is supposed to be one of the things that's the big benefit of having a content management system, is that you're able to maintain your site on your own. But so many customers, so many site owners get into a situation that they've hired somebody who said that he or she knew how to do Drupal, when in fact that person really didn't know how. And we all start from somewhere. I was in that same situation. I thought that I knew how to do Drupal. I knew how to hack together a site basically, but I made, a lot of the same mistakes that any beginner Drupal developers make. Maybe some of them I didn't make. I did it the right way from the beginning, but there are a lot of them that I did make. And not considering the user interface that happens to be the back end part of the user interface for the people who are going to be then maintaining the site later on is one of the mistakes that a lot of new Drupal developers will make. They hack together the site in any way that they can so that it looks good from the front end, it looks like it's working, but then when it's time for somebody else to do something with that site later on, it's a real problem because it's put together in this horrendously convoluted, not extendable, unsustainable way. And this can give people a really bad taste in their mouth for a Drupal because they get this Drupal site that's turned over to them and now they want to use it and they say, well, Drupal's terrible. This is impossible to do anything with this. But it's not a matter that Drupal is terrible at all. It's a matter that the site was built by somebody who didn't really know how to do Drupal. They knew maybe enough to be dangerous, but they didn't understand how to utilize the power of Drupal properly. And so they turn over a site to somebody that's really aggravating for them to use. And that's really unfortunate. It doesn't have to be that way. And it really makes me feel like sad and upset. It pains me. I really feel hurt when I hear people talk about Drupal and say it's so hard to learn and it's so impossible to use, and you have to be a genius to be able to do anything with it. Because I've had enough experience with it now, and I can appreciate the power, I can appreciate the flexibility, and I know what you can do with Drupal when you only take the time to understand how to put the pieces together in the right way. But naturally, the trick is that you've got to figure out how to put the pieces together in the right way. Well, based on my experience of having learned to do Drupal, all the years I've been working on it now, in my early experiences of searching for things on the internet and finding some screencasts that people had done, finding some blog posts that they wrote, and seeing how much that helped me, I've had a desire for quite some time to build a tool that would help people to be able to learn how to do this faster and easier. Now, I should acknowledge, of course, I'm not the first one to come up with this idea. There are a lot of sites out there. There are paid sites and there are free sites that are available to help people learn how to do Drupal. And yet, the demand for Drupal developers far outstrips the supply. And by Drupal developers, I'm using that in a generic sense. Maybe I shouldn't use the word developer. It's a little more cumbersome to say Drupal service provider. But there are many ways that people are involved in building Drupal, from the front end to the back end. And even including being a designer. And it's helpful to understand how Drupal works when you put your design together. And that's not intended to say that a designer should be so constrained and bound by how we can build a design because Drupal can't handle it any other way than 1, 2, 3. But when you're using a framework, you do need to understand how to use a framework properly to leverage it properly. And right now, there's not a large supply of these skilled Drupal service providers who know how to leverage Drupal properly. And that's these existing sites notwithstanding. We still don't have enough people who know how to do Drupal. There's a great demand for it. I witnessed the demand for that pretty much every day, although not literally every day. It comes and goes, but every week I'm contacted by a good handful of recruiters with openings that they're looking to fill. There's direct hires, there's agencies, there's all kinds of different job opportunities out there, and it's really difficult for people to fill those openings with skilled Drupal service providers. So whatever we've got right now with the existing offerings of the various learning on demand sites, they're not helping to meet the demand for Drupal developers. And so it's clear that we need some other option out there. And I would say it's equally clear that there are so many organizations, so many companies, even so many individuals out there who could really use another source for developing Drupal talent, either for themselves directly so that they can get a better idea of how to maintain their sites, or for people who want to become Drupal developers and tap into this huge job market that's out there. So in the spirit of open source and in the spirit of collaboration, and honestly, having been inspired by Khan Academy, I came up with the idea to build this Drupal training site that was going to be a free site and an open source site that's going to be part of the collaboration with a lot of people to get all the best ideas together. And then on top of it, I had come up with this idea of a way that I could take what Khan Academy was doing and even extend that further. And so the idea that I came up with was this ridiculously open online self-training site. And I came up with the ROOSTS acronym because it's supposed to sound like we're talking about a nest, like this safe place where the fledgling birds can be nurtured, they can be nourished, and they can get the opportunity to build up their strength and their abilities to be able to fly out of the nest and go out into the world on their own. And so I needed a way that I was going to be able to make this vision a reality. And so that's why I chose to go the route of a Kickstarter. As much as I love the idea of being free and open source and being ridiculously open source and helping people to learn how to do Drupal so we've got a better supply, a bigger supply of skilled Drupal service providers, and that I could spread the, evangelize Drupal out there, show everybody how great and wonderful Drupal is. It's something that I couldn't do on my own. It's something that I couldn't do just in my own free time. It just wasn't happening. It wasn't happening in part because, as I've mentioned, I got a ton of work that comes to me. I'm able to bill a really nice hourly rate, and it's a really tough challenge for me to say, I'm not going to take on this project that's going to pay me right now, and instead, I'm going to sit down and spend my own time, the free time that really doesn't exist in my life right now, and build this free product for everybody. So I want it to be free, I want it to be open source, but I still need money to build the site. And so I decided, well, let me get this launched, let me get it off the ground with a Kickstarter campaign. Because I think there are a lot of people out there who could benefit from it, from the side of learning how to do Drupal, and I think there are a lot of people, companies, organizations out there that could benefit from it existing in terms of more Drupal service providers out there. So this should stand a really good chance of succeeding. At the same time, I needed to make sure that whatever funding I got was going to be adequate to build something substantial. It needed to be more than just a couple of simple screencasts. I needed to demonstrate the potential that this product was going to have. And so I estimated that it would take 1,000 hours of work. There's nothing magic about the 1,000 hours. It's 6 months. If you figure a standard work year is 2,000 hours, and 6 months is half of that is 1,000 hours. And so I picked 1,000 hours would be a good amount to build a reasonably well-featured tool that people could start using. And then once that tool was built, then I'd have something that I could take to these other companies or organizations or even potentially individuals who would have a vested interest in seeing the tool continue to be built and marketed, and give them a way that they could sponsor the ongoing development of this product that I have in mind. So I've been working on the process now for just about a week and a half. I've put a lot of hours into it, and I'm finding that, not surprisingly, even getting the project video ready to go is taking way more time, is way more challenging than I thought it was going to be. But I've also found that going through this process right now of launching the Kickstarter and starting to make the product known, that I'm making some great connections with people. and I'm finding some